Throughout Valorant's history, there's been one agent that Riot just can't seem to figure out. An agent that can take over ranked games with ease, yet is considered by many to be one of the worst agents in the game. That agent is none other than Reyna. At a glance, she has a simple and weak set of abilities that don't provide much value to her team, and you rarely see her in pro play. So if she's so bad, why do so many people hate playing against her, and why has she remained nearly untouched by the Valorant balance team for years? Let's talk about Reyna's past, problems, and how Riot can fix this agent. Reyna was released with the launch of Valorant on June 2nd of 2020, alongside Ascent, Spike Rush, and a slew of other changes from the beta and patch 1.0. Reyna was much different from the rest of the cast, with a very selfish kit that didn't provide much value to the team and a unique mechanic where she needed to get a kill before she could use some of her abilities. The initial reception to her release was mixed, as it always is with new agents, though she worked a little bit differently from how she does today, and she had a few bugs. There was an ESPN article that came out right after she released where multiple pro players gave their thoughts on Reyna, and they all thought she was either way too strong or fairly balanced. It's hard to get proper ranked pick rate stats from this time, since websites like blitz.gg or ValorBuff typically don't let you look back all the way to launch, but it's safe to assume that an easy-to-learn new duelist saw plenty of play. It was already clear that Reyna's specialty was dominating uncoordinated games, and that she might have a harder time in professional play due to her lack of utility and reliance on winning duels. But people were still getting used to how she worked and how to counter her, and there was little organized high-level play at launch with VCT First Strike on the horizon. The first big tournaments after launch were part of the Ignition series, a series of more than 20 third-party tournaments supported by Riot that ran from late June to September. Reyna saw a lot of play in these early tournaments, competing with agents like Jett or Phoenix for playtime, and sitting somewhere around a 20% pick rate. While these events were happening, Reyna would receive her first balance change in patch 1.2, a minuscule buff that made killing Phoenix while he was ulting drop a soul orb. Throughout the rest of the Ignition series, Reyna's pick rate would plummet as the meta developed, hovering around 0 to 20% with a couple exceptions. It was hard to find a reason to play her when Jett and even Phoenix provided so much more value to the team with their ability to easily open up sites, with Jett being picked in almost every match at this point. Despite her drop in popularity in pro play, she would remain one of the most popular agents in ranked for the rest of 2020 and beyond. Shortly after the Ignition series ended, Valorant's first official tournament would be announced, and Reyna would receive her first nerf in patch 1.9. Her fire rate increase when she used her ultimate would be reduced from 25% to 15%, matching it with Brim's newly buffed Stim Beacon, which provided the same boost. This nerf was too small to matter, and honestly it's pretty justified if you read Riot's reasoning. But by now, Reyna's place in the meta had become a divisive topic in the community. Complaints ranged from Reyna not needing a nerf to Reyna being too overpowered, but most of the people that thought she was too strong were lower ranked players who'd frequent run-ins with smurfs abusing Reyna's ability to pub stomp, a problem we'll talk about a lot in this video. About a month after the nerf, First Strike, the first tournament hosted by Riot, would begin. First Strike was split into multiple regional tournaments, unlike the international events we have today. Ignoring the open qualifiers since anybody could join them, Reyna's pick rate was different in every region, averaging out to be about 25%. A slight increase since the later Ignition series tourneys, mostly due to double duelist comps being meta. A lot of Reyna's playtime was in Icebox, the newest map in the game at the time, due to how open the map is and her ability to abuse off angles and dismiss to safety. This was pretty much Reyna's all-time peak in pro play, and about a month after First Strike ended, the Valorant Insights team would publish an article going into detail on how data affects how Riot chooses to balance Valorant. Data from this post gives us our first accurate look at Reyna's pick rate in ranked matches, and it turns out that in patch 1.11 she had a pick rate of 73%, the highest in the game by over 10%. This isn't actually as crazy as it sounds though, since Reyna is so good at dominating lower ranked games through gun skill alone, and Sage had an even higher pick rate of 90% and ranked a few patches earlier. Throughout the end of 2020 and into the beginning of Valorant's second episode, the community's view of Reyna was still split. Despite her high pick rate and ranked, she was actually pretty balanced, and most active players recognized this. But she was very frustrating to deal with due to her ability to snowball fights and win fights no other agent could, especially in lower ranks where players have worse aim. It was infuriating to fight a Reyna during pistol round when she had full shield and the Sheriff because your Reyna decided to run into mid alone. A smurfing Reyna could completely take over a game, and Valorant didn't have the same smurf protection it has today. Riot needed to figure out a way to keep Reyna in check without butchering her, since her pick rate in VCT was actually quite healthy, compared to Jett, who was dominating the meta. So, what was Riot's plan?
most controversial change, I personally think, is the nerf to Reyna. In short, the maximum amount of devour or dismiss charges that you could have before was 4. It's now been halved. You can only have 2 at most, and those charges cost a little bit more as well. They used to be 100 credits, they're now 200 credits.
Slaying enemies that Reyna has damaged in the last 3 seconds now drop soul orbs, even if the Reyna does not land that killing shot.
Reyna gets a dual nerf and buff in hopes of reining in some of her pub stomp potential. Oh, the only thing she's good at, while still keeping her viable in balanced and coordinated play.
I think the Reyna nerf are really good for a team environment. I think it's a buff in a team environment, because then you just have your Reyna like 2nd or 3rd entry, and off damage she can do whatever. But in pugs, it's definitely a nerf. I feel like, you know what I mean? She have less heals, less ease.
Tens of thousands of tweets about it. Was Reyna getting nerfed? Because evidently...
Actually, I don't think Reyna got nerfed here. I'm gonna say something controversial. I don't think Reyna got nerfed. I think Reyna got buffed.
For some places,
she got buffed?
She definitely got nerfed for some places.
I actually think Reyna got buffed because it made her utility more consistent now. Because you can actually more consistently get orbs.
These changes were a bit controversial. Okay, very controversial. There were so many people talking about these changes that Reyna even started trending on Twitter. I honestly think that these changes were a step in the right direction, and I'm glad Riot was willing to take a bit of a chance with it. But it didn't really fix Reyna's core problems. She still didn't provide much utility, and was still ultra reliant on the player's ability to get kills. We would get a better idea of how strong Reyna was during VCT Stage 1 Masters, a series of closed regional tournaments throughout the world in March of 2021. Her pick rate averaged out to be about 13%, half of what it was in First Strike. But double duelist is still the most prevalent kind of comp, so she wasn't completely boxed out by the strength of Jett and Raze. A 13% pick rate certainly isn't good, but it's nothing to panic over. Other agents like Phoenix, Skye, or Vipers had around the same rates, and teams will often overestimate how much a nerf actually hurts an agent. Reyna's pick rate would continue to fluctuate in VCT Challengers 1, 2, and Finals, but we would get a solid idea of Reyna's real strength now that the dust had settled in VCT Masters 2 Reykjavik in May of 2021. Reykjavik was Valorant's first official international tournament, and the best teams from each region would pull out all the stops to get the trophy. Reyna would appear in a grand total of 4 maps, being picked by the same team in all of them. A 5% pick rate. Yikes. In all fairness, the team that picked them was Sentinels, who won the entire tournament without dropping a single map. But still, she was sitting with Yoru at the bottom of the barrel in terms of pick rate. It's fair to say that Reyna was one of the worst agents in pro play at this time, so a month after Reykjavik she would receive 2 small nerfs in patch 3.0. Wait, what? These nerfs were tiny, only making her abilities a little bit more expensive, and one of the nerfs affected some other characters as well. Every agent and gun was adjusted in this patch, but a nerf to Reyna still didn't really make much sense, no matter how small. This patch also marked the start of a bit of a balance change throughout for Reyna, as she wouldn't receive any more attention for over a year. Once again, I don't really have a reliable way to see ranked pick rates, but we can see from the small glimpses I do have that her pick rate stayed high in ranked even after the 2.3 and 3.0 nerfs. A massive disparity between pro play and ranked that is pretty rare to see. Reyna thrived in the chaos of a comp game where she could pick enemies off one by one without being traded or being forced out by well-placed utility. In pro play, she had a hard time breaking into sites. She was pretty much always played with another duelist like Jett or Raze who was better at entering, and pro teams were much better at preventing her from getting picks so she can't snowball effectively. Throughout the middle of 2021, Reyna's pick rate in Challengers stayed around 20% until Valorant's second international tournament of the year, VCT Stage 3 Masters Berlin. At Masters Berlin, Reyna would actually make a bit of a comeback, with a pick rate of 24%, mostly being played on Icebox, Split, and the newest map at the event, Breeze, a wide open map that encouraged taking duels and aim diffing your opponents, 2 things which Reyna is obviously great at. Double duelist was still very prevalent here, especially on the maps Reyna was played on the most, though not as much anymore due to the absurd strength of Astra and Viper taking over the meta, as well as double initiator comps becoming more popular. 24% is the highest pick rate Reyna has ever had in an international tournament to this day, though it's not like she immediately fell off after Berlin. She had a 90% pick rate overall in the last chance qualifiers for Champions, once again mostly being picked in Icebox. Champions 2021 would start in December, and Reyna would show up with a pick rate of 23%, with most of her playtime being on, you guessed it, Icebox. Not much had changed since Masters Berlin, and the same kinds of comps were still seeing playtime. Ascent would be crowned in the finals against Gambit, and 2021 would end on an alright note. Reyna was a solid middle-of-the-pack agent in pro play, and still a force to be reckoned with in ranked. 2021 had been full of ups and downs, but hopefully her pick rate would remain steady going into 2022. In the first Challengers events of the 2022 VCT season from January to March, Reyna's pick rate would plummet to just 9% overall, a massive drop from the 2021 season. What happened? Reyna hadn't received any new balance changes in half a year. She was still the same agent as before. The main reason is just that the meta had developed during the offseason with the release of Chamber right before Champions, and teams had learned how to counter Reyna by now. Reyna relied on her team to set her up to get kills way more than an agent like Jet or Chamber. This trend would continue at Masters Reykjavik 2022, where she would have a pick rate of 4%, with 3 of those picks coming from Paper Rex. Reyna wasn't the only duelist to see low playtime in pro play, with Phoenix, Neon, and Yoru all struggling to fit into the meta. But Reyna was the only one of these that had a very high pick rate in ranked despite her place in the tier list. Yoru had just gotten a rework, Neon got some changes right after Reykjavik, and Phoenix would get some buffs a couple months later. Even Jet had gotten a massive change to her dash about a month after Reykjavik to tone down her strength. But Reyna was a nightmare to balance, as Riot would upset someone no matter what they did. She would stay at the bottom of the barrel throughout the Challengers events leading up to Masters Copenhagen, with a pick rate of about 7%. By the time Copenhagen came around, Chamber meta was in full swing, with most comps consisting of Chamber and then either Jet or Raze, depending on the map. At Masters Copenhagen, Reyna would not be picked a single time. She had been completely boxed out by Chamber, as he could do what Reyna did while also providing utility to the team with trips and slows. But hey, at least she wasn't the only one. The future was bleak for Reyna, and things weren't getting any better. She would not be picked a single time during the 2022 Last Chance qualifiers, a 0% pick rate worldwide. Even Phoenix and Yoru saw a little bit of game time during LCQ. This was truly the darkest era for Reyna in pro play. This trend would continue at Champions Istanbul, where she would only be picked twice by good old Paper Rex. She still saw plenty of playtime in ranked, of course, but that really wasn't much consolation. There really isn't even much more to say. Reyna was terrible and the strength of Chamber and Fade made her pretty much unplayable at Champions. Reyna would finally get some changes after a year and a half of waiting in patch 5.7, and this time, they were actually buffs. All of the agent changes in this patch were focused on flashes, and Reyna's Leer would get some nice buffs that made it easier for her to capitalize off of the near sight herself, as well as the removal of the range limit, and a decent nerf to the duration, but the duration didn't matter too much since the eye will normally just get shot down. These changes actually made her Leer quite a bit better, but the issue is that it didn't address her core issues at all. Her blind was just the easiest ability to buff because it was never really oppressive or problematic in the first place. The response to this buff was pretty split, as it always is, with some people agreeing that Reyna needed some help or saying this wasn't enough to make her viable, and others saying that she was already OP or that this buff was too much. You have to remember that the average player sees a Reyna in almost all of their comp games, often in the hands of a smurf. If someone doesn't keep up with the pro scene, it would make sense for them to think that Reyna was overpowered or unfair. The VCT season was over for the year, but we wouldn't actually have to wait long to see how these buffs impacted Reyna in pro play. Valorant Game Changers is something I haven't mentioned up until now, mostly because the Reyna pick rates were pretty much the same in Game Changers as everywhere else. The International Game Changers Championship in Berlin would give us a good idea of Reyna's place in the meta, and it still wasn't looking good. She was only picked 5 times, all on Breeze, which was barely better than the most recent VCT events. Her Leer was not the part of Reyna that needed to be buffed, as most of the core problems with her kit stemmed from how her Dismiss and Devour worked. The team that picked Reyna the most would actually end up winning the entire event, and after that the season was truly over for the year. The off-season was anything but boring though, with the transition to the new franchised esports system and one hell of a roster mania. More importantly though, in early December of 2022, patch 5.12 would release, and it completely gutted Chamber, marking the end of the Chamber meta that had lasted for so long and boxed out duelists like Jet or Reyna. With one of her biggest competitors out of the meta and duelists back in the spotlight, Reyna was primed for a comeback, and she would get her first chance at the opening event of the 2023 season in Sao Paulo. Throughout the whole event, Reyna would be picked a total of 1 time, by everyone's favorite team, RRQ, on Lotus, the newest map in the game at the time. RRQ unsurprisingly got destroyed, and that was all the playtime Reyna got at lock-in. The power vacuum left by nerfs to Chamber had been easily filled by Jet and Killjoy, agents who had struggled when Chamber was at his peak but were still very strong. Reyna just didn't have a place in the meta, as most teams were using Jet as their main fragger on entry, and double initiator and double controller comps were much more common than running multiple duelists. This trend would continue in the new regional leagues, where she would only be picked 5 times across every region, with a majority of those picks coming from Paper Rex, who also picked Yoru and Phoenix a number of times. Paper Rex had a very unique way of playing Reyna, and they were the only team who were really able to make her work. Reyna would also get her most recent change to date in the middle of these leagues in patch 6.7, removing the directional indicator that enemies saw when Reyna used her Leer. This change was just to make the UI more consistent, so it didn't really change anything. Patch 6.7 also added Bind back to the competitive map pool, replacing Icebox, the map where Reyna had been played the most. Icebox was easily her best map, especially after Breeze had been taken out of the pool a few months earlier, so this removal really hurt any chances of her being played at all in the rest of the 2023 season. On the bright side, Bind is one of Reyna's better maps, and it's where she would see the most play after Icebox was gone. This brings us to the most recent international event as of now, Valorant Masters Tokyo. In the lead up to the event, Paper Rex, the team that had been playing Reyna the most in the past months, announced that their main Reyna player, Something, would not be able to play at the event due to visa issues. So even though PRX ended up placing third at the event, they didn't pick Reyna at all. But to everybody's surprise, Evil Geniuses picked up the Reyna in the last map of the grand final as they lost against Fnatic, resulting in Reyna ending up with a 1% pick rate at the event. With the end of Masters Tokyo, that brings us to the current day. Reyna is still a very divisive agent in the community, and she's one of the hardest for Riot to balance since her pick rates in ranked and pro play are so different from one another. Other agents like Yoru or Phoenix that I've mentioned multiple times in this video don't have this problem, and that makes it much easier for Riot to buff or rework them without as much worry. As of when I'm finishing up this video, Phoenix and Yoru have pick rates of 18% and 9% respectively in the past 30 days of ranked play according to Valor Buff. Compare that to Reyna's ranked pick rate of 57%, the highest in the game, and you can see the issue pretty clearly. So, we've talked a lot about why Reyna is so problematic, but what can Riot do about her? There's already been tons of videos and posts made about this, some of them by people who understand Valorant quite a bit better than me, so I'll try to keep this part brief. I do want to highlight a video that Thinking Man's Valorant made a year ago, which I will link in the description. There's 3 main things Riot can do about Reyna. 1. Just leave her alone. Reyna is not actually a very unique kind of character within competitive games. Someone that dominates in casual games but sucks in pro play, a pub stomper. I don't like the idea of keeping her in her current state, but maybe it's for the best. 2. Keep trying to buff and balance her in her current state. This is what Riot has been doing for the past couple of years, and needless to say it hasn't helped her much. They have been tiptoeing around Reyna's actual problems, and honestly I don't blame them. But I don't think that they will be able to fix Reyna just by changing her numbers, so that leaves us with option 3, a rework. When people think about reworks, they often think about overhauling an agent's entire kit like with Yoru, but they don't have to be that dramatic. I'm sure the dev team could find ways to balance out her kit with smaller reworks to her mechanics, but Reyna is such a popular character that reworking any part of her is a huge risk, as you could ruin her for the players that love playing her. Reyna has had a rocky past, and it's impossible to know how Riot will balance her, or if they will at all, but I'm sure that Reyna's history isn't over yet. I want to thank you all for the support you've been showing me recently. It has been insane. I did this video a bit differently from the Yoru one and I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about this editing style. I read all of your comments, so don't be afraid to give some feedback. I'm also planning on making a Discord server sometime soon and possibly even streaming, so be on the lookout for that. If you want to see more, make sure to subscribe, because I have a lot planned. I'll see you next time.